In previous videos, I said that Sony would be releasing the A7S III in the first half of 2020, but this was before the COVID-19 or coronavirus outbreak. However, I still believe Sony is on schedule to announce the A7S II successor, and I believe that most likely will be on April the 20th at their press conference. Let's get into it.
Delivering informative capability-based reviews and tutorials on camera gear, filming techniques, and content creation.
Hi, it's Simon from The Ordinary Filmmaker. If you're new here, make sure you click the subscribe and like button, as it really does help support my channel. And all the links to everything I talk about or reference in this video are located in the description down below. A couple of weeks ago, NAB 2020 was cancelled. This is a broadcaster and videographer conference and trade show that's usually held in Las Vegas around the end of April. Sony immediately set up their own press conference scheduled for April the 20th at noon Eastern Time or New York time. In a statement, Sony said that they're eager to share their innovations. I stated that the A7S III is likely to be announced in April, and I think that this is where it's going to happen. It's possible, right? Well, the A7S II came out in October 2015. That's 4.5 years ago. Okay, let's round up. That's 5 years ago. We are due, but what will it be capable of? The basic expectation is for things like 4K 60, 10-bit 422, and a lot of manufacturers are doing that right now. But I want to think in a different way and create something that goes beyond the expectations of our customers. He's right. A lot of people are doing 4K 60, 10-bit 422, and that's pretty much a given for today in this type of camera in this type of price range. So what does this mean to go beyond our expectations? Well, some of you have said you expect 1080p at 240 frames per second, 4K at 120 frames per second, better codecs, increased bit rates, Apple ProRes. It's definitely been a long wait. It takes a lot of work, a good deal of time, so for the time frame, it may be required longer than you can possibly imagine. So what does he mean by that? Longer than we can possibly imagine. What kind of technology are they working on that could take 5 years? Well, let's say 4 years to develop. What kind of technology would it take that long? Are they waiting for technology to catch up? Are they waiting for prices to come down to make the technology more affordable? Will it have 8K? Well, Sony had this to say about in an interview with Cinema 5D. I wouldn't say by 2020, but in the long term, 8K is very important even for small cameras like our mirrorless cameras. But Cinema 5D pressed further. So again, this is maybe not the next step, but the next step. Sony responded, let's see. So they left the door open, and again, this was 2 years ago, so it's very possible that this camera might have 8K. But how do they exceed expectations? A lot of you have said, I don't really care for 8K or even 6K. What you want is you want detailed 1080, you want detailed 4K, you want better slow motion, you want 240 or 120 frames per second in 1080, and you want it to be sharp. The same for 4K. Maybe not 240 frames per second though. I'd like to use the example of the X-T4 and the Canon EOS R5. Each company took a different approach to their next generation camera. The X-T3 was a very good camera and still is today, but it was lacking in several areas. It didn't have IBIS, and for videographers, especially doing run and gun work, that stabilization was really important because not many lenses had it. By giving it IBIS, that opened up a whole new set of lenses. You had a much larger lens selection to choose from. Autofocus was tweaked and improved, and pretty well every other capability offered by the camera was tweaked and improved. Fuji basically took on the whole concept of refinement, looking at every part of the camera, refining what needed to be refined, and adding new capabilities as needed, producing the X-T4, which is an incredibly capable camera, much more capable than the X-T3. Canon, on the other hand, decided to leapfrog the competition, providing an 8K camera that many of you, and I got a ton of comments saying that you didn't believe this was going to happen. I got some nasty comments actually. But Canon has since come out and said, yes, it's going to have 8K video. It's going to be uncropped, and it's going to have their dual pixel autofocus. It will have 4K 120. It will have 12 frames per second mechanical and 20 frames per second electronic. A lot of you thought this was going to be a replacement or kill the 1DX Mark III, and many of you even said that this is several generations ahead of what is currently available. So two companies taking completely different approaches. So how is Sony going to approach the A7S III? There's been very little in terms of rumors out there to really know what they're doing or what even they're thinking of, other than they want to exceed our expectations. what I think would be really useful is taking the Fuji approach, refining an already impressive camera and updating it so it's competitive with everything else out there. We don't need 8K, we don't need 16K, we don't need 100 frames per second or anything ridiculous. Some rumors and several discussion boards have pointed to the A7S III ditching the full frame sensor for the medium format sensor. I really don't think this is very likely, especially for a video-centric camera. But don't take my word for it, here's what Sony said in that Cinema 5D interview. There are still a lot of things we need to do for full frame, so we don't have a plan for medium format. We want to keep innovating full frame and also APS-C. Why are so many of you concerned about the direction that Sony's taking with their mirrorless cameras? In Max Uria's video, he talks about his concern. But he also goes into the background of why he fell in love with Sony and why many of you flocked to Sony. And I know why. Sony created a lot of excitement. They were innovating. Every year they were coming out with new and wonderful things. It takes me back to the 80s when Commodore and Atari were all competing, and every year new computers were coming out with great new capabilities. And I can appreciate that excitement. At the time, I was with Canon. You see, back in 2013, my son was born, and I had a Canon 70D. My wife wanted me to get a video camera. So I went to the camera store, not knowing a lot about cameras, and I asked the clerk, what camera should I go with? He said, well, you've got the 50D. If you want to keep using your same lenses, you can go to the Canon 70D, and you just need to buy the body. Does it produce really good 1080? I said. He says, yes, the video is very good on this camera. So I bought it, and I wasn't disappointed. I wasn't really excited. I was just, like many of you, an ordinary filmmaker taking videos of my son and him interacting with the world. But over the years, I started to get better at what I was doing, and I wanted a better camera. I wanted to tell the story better. Then Canon announced and released the 80D, and it was a major yawn. I wasn't concerned at the time. I thought, well, let's just wait a little longer and see what Canon comes out with. By 2018, they released the EOS R. And I understand that concern that many of you as Sony owners feel. What's going on? These announcements are years apart. We're not getting major announcements every year, and what we're getting is not exciting us. And what's worse, the competition is coming out with much better products. So as a Canon owner, I understand that concern. But as a Sony owner, you've got really good cameras and lenses now. Sure, you might not have 8K or 6K, but how many of us really need that? Sure, it creates excitement, it gets press, and it gets a lot of press. Look at how many videos I've released talking about the R5. And the main reason I have a lot more videos about Canon than Sony is Sony's done a much better job of keeping the information pipelines closed. But I wouldn't be worried. Sony produces really good cameras and really good gear. I really do believe that Sony has been working hard on the A7S III for 5 years, and I do believe that we're going to see the A7S III announced April. Yes, in 2020, there is a lot more competition. The Nikon Z6 is a very, very good camera, and it's a very capable camera for video. Low light performance is good, as is the autofocus. And now Canon has stepped up. Just think back a year ago. If I had told you that Canon was going to produce a really good camera in the 1DX Mark III, or if they're going to come out with 8K video, many of you would have laughed at me. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. When I released these videos just a couple of months ago talking about the R5 and the first rumors and that it was going to have 8K, I had an incredible amount of comments saying, "Are you nuts? This would involve Canon leapfrogging the competition." And back then, the idea of Canon leapfrogging anybody was a silly idea. Canon was asleep at the wheel. But that it would have 8K, 4K 120, I was laughed at. And the comments, I won't put some of them up here, were pretty nasty. And I understood a lot of these comments. I understood the frustration. I didn't feel that I was being attacked. I feel like people were saying, "You gotta be kidding me. Canon won't even give us IBIS, and you think they're gonna give us 8K raw video?" Well, turned out it wasn't 8K raw video, it was 8K video, but still. But things started to change last year, around October. I think it was October the 24th that Canon issued their development announcement. And this was unlike any other development announcement. It was unlike anything from Canon. It was detailed. There was a ton of stuff on there. And people were going, "What's going on? This seems too good to be true." And sure enough, they released the camera, and it really wasn't crippled all that much. Sure, there were some issues with 4K, but if you're willing to accept a 15% cropped, it produced really good 4K. And yes, there are some issues. In this video here, I talk about spots on the sensor and some other issues, and there's a firmware update coming for that. But then on the heels of that announcement, we had rumors on the R5 and the R6. And despite all those nasty comments, which I totally understand, Canon came out just a couple of weeks ago, and I talked about it in this video here, where Canon Australia said the King is coming. And yes, it does have 8K video. Yes, it's going to be uncropped. And yes, it's going to have autofocus and in all 8K video modes. Things seem to go in cycles. I don't believe that Sony is at any risk of going under. Maybe they're taking a slight pause. I don't know. But let's hold off. Let's wait till the end of April. I think we will see the A7S III, and if not, yeah, I understand your concern. I don't know what I would do. There's so much choice out there right now. If I have a large lens library of Sony lenses, then I'm probably not going to jump ship. I might think of, well, maybe I'll go with the A7 III or maybe the A7 IV. They're very capable cameras and produce really good video. But I'd also look at Canon. I'd also look at Nikon. And there's also the rumor that the Nikon's coming out with their Z8. So we'll see what that brings. But don't be too concerned. Let's just wait another month. It's not much more time to go, and we'll have a new camera, I think. Maybe. In this segment, I want to give you a little bit of behind the scenes. It's not going to be as polished. You're going to see some of my mistakes. This video is tracking to be about 15 minutes long, and the reason I know that is after I film each act, I bring it into the computer and I just check to see if everything's looking okay. And for that 15 minutes, I've probably recorded close to an hour and a half worth of video, and that's a lot of waste. But I'm rehearsing, I'm making sure I deliver you a pretty good video. If I just go with my first take on this, there's a lot of errors, a lot of mistakes, and that can be very difficult to follow along in the message, and generally people will click off. So what I do, as I'm coming up with my idea, I'll start to write it down in point form, I'll start to just write sentences, and it'll just come out. And then what I do is I refine it. And then I load it into my teleprompter. Now the teleprompter is not something I follow word for word. Yes, I used to do that, but with your feedback I've decided to ditch the teleprompter for every word, and I look at you directly through the lens and I'm communicating with you instead, coming right out of my mouth, all these words. The first 2 paragraphs of each video though are heavily scripted. The introduction and what comes after the intro, and the reason for that is the first 15 minutes of every video are extremely important. You can lose 70% of the people who click on your video within the first 15 seconds. And the reason they click away, it looks too amateurish, there's too many mistakes, there doesn't seem to be a clear message, the audio is really bad. It can be any number of reasons. And people are usually gone within 15 seconds if they're just not happy. In my earlier videos, I did lose up to 70% of my views within the first 15 seconds. Now, I don't lose nearly as much. I'm able to keep people much longer. I'm able to keep people to watch much longer. In my last few videos, people have been watching on average for about 4 to 5 minutes. And that's a lot. Considering some people click off right away, a lot of people are sticking right to the end. And that's really good news. I feel like I'm achieving something, I'm producing something better. So once I load it into the teleprompter, I will read off the first 2 paragraphs, and then I'm just going point form, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. The first time I go through it, I make some mistakes, it's not polished as well, I might trip over my words, so I'll repeat that section. And sometimes I might do it as many as 10 times. If you've ever watched it behind the scenes for movies and you see how many takes they take, it's the same for a YouTube channel. And the one thing you really need to understand is the level of effort that goes into producing content for a YouTube channel is comparable to what goes on in a 30-minute TV show. If you ever look at the credits at the bottom, you see all those different roles. I would say that to produce content for a YouTube channel, you have probably about 60 to 70% of those roles, and I'm responsible for all of it. It's an awful lot of work. Rigging, lighting, teleprompters, microphones, video, editing, special effects. It goes on. Voice coaching, this is a new objective that I recently added. I'm trying to look at my cadence, my intonation, and I'm trying to improve upon it a little bit. When I started out, I was a lot more amateurish, and I'm trying to get to that level where I can still bring through some of my humor, some of my personality, but I don't want to have annoying attributes when I speak. And some of you have mentioned some things, and I'm paying attention to it. I'm watching how I present because I have a world audience. Many of you, a good 50% of you or more, English is not your primary language. That's one of the reasons why I release subtitles. But it's also important that I enunciate my words clearly. And I do know how to enunciate my words, but it's so much more difficult being in front of a camera because I have to think of what I need to say. I have to think of so many different things. Oh, and then there's my enunciation. So again, I keep working on that with each video to improve upon that as well. So that's just a bit of a snapshot of what goes on from the video side. And then once that's done, I bring it over to the computer, and it's probably another hour or more to do some editing there. And then once I've finished editing, it's about uploading it into YouTube, and that's where I produce the subtitles. I produce about, I think it's around 10 to 12 subtitles. And the subtitles are based on what YouTube is showing me as where you guys are visiting from. And every now and then I'll throw in some other language, see if they track, if I get a lot of clicks off of them. And I've added and removed languages over the time, but right now, give you an idea, outside of English, Germany is the most common destination, and the German subtitles is second to English. And outside of German, I have Spanish and then Chinese. Now, 3 or 4 months ago, Russia was second. And the amount of views I got from people using Russian subtitles was up. So I'm always looking at the analytics, seeing what I can do there to improve upon my chances of getting you guys to find my video and to watch it. But a lot of it goes into improving my presentation skills. I know my set isn't the greatest. I know my lighting could be improved. But before I spend a lot of time on upgrading those, I really want to focus on improving upon my presentation skills, how I speak to you, the pacing, all of that, how I pause, and not huffing and puffing too much. And that's something I'm working on too. I'm watching videos on how to improve how I speak in front of a camera so I don't lose my breath. There's a lot to it. I will improve my studio work. I've mentioned that before. Probably not going to happen for a few months. If I can produce really good content for you guys, I know you're not going to be too concerned about the background and that I'm using a green screen. And yes, the lighting will get better too. I do have a roadmap for all this, and I do plan on getting better with each video. But as I've said in my other videos, your feedback matters. I don't always follow your recommendations or take your options, but I listen to them. And as you can see in the last month, there's been a definite change in how I deliver my content. It's not read right off a teleprompter. It's a little bit more natural, a little bit more like I'm having a conversation with you. But again, I do appreciate you sticking it out. I do appreciate watching my videos, for liking, for sharing, and recommending to others. It means an awful lot to me. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. All equipment used and notes are placed in the description box, show more box, or down arrow thingy next to the title on the mobile app.